Okay. Well, while you close your PowerPoint window, I'd like to thank you very, very much, Grace, and also Rachel, for such an interesting presentation. I mean, I'm using interesting as a word that's getting thrown away quite often. Also for like really boring things, but I really mean it's interesting. Especially because even if I experienced Danarto during his lifetime, but sadly I actually never really got acquainted with his earlier works. I'm more familiar with maybe his short stories in Kompas newspaper or Republika newspaper somewhere between 2000 up until maybe his death. But I'm really happy to finally get acquainted with his earlier works that are, I feel, that are much more experimental in a way, not only how he creates something, but also questioning a lot about relationship between creator, work, audience, and circumstances as well. So I do feel that his earlier works have more complex questions. But I guess this is something we could chat about, see if my impression of Danarto is indeed valid, or I simply have to look more and understand more about the stages of his work. Which brings us into this interest, like another very detailed, well-researched presentation of information here that is a timeline of Danarto's creative life. Yeah. Okay. So who's
and some gossips.
do you wanna and some gossip? Let's say it's an artistic biography. Then
there's a difference.
yeah, please.
I wanted to put this up. This is of course not a finished timeline, but this is something Rachel and I have been working on, and now finally Rachel can smoke. We have been working on this. We are still expanding this, and actually we're inviting quite a number of people really to comment on what we have presented. There is Mas Bambang Bujono, who, like, some of the materials that that were in our presentation came from that stuff that he wrote. So he actually experienced Danarto's works. There's also Mas Hendro Wianto, who actually wrote an unpublished obituary on Danarto. I guess no one would publish it because it's like 8 pages. It needs a different platform.
Well, this is the time of self-publishing anyway, so Mas Hendro, this is your time.
Yeah,
don't hold back.
Also, also maybe we need to address that if there are questions in Bahasa, it's okay. We can summarize. We will not live translate it, but we will summarize the questions in Bahasa. And if it's okay, maybe we answer in English, so that it doesn't need to be translated. And there is also Saleh Hussein, who live. Saleh Hussein, who somehow I started also talking about early Danarto's works, particularly the non-fiction ones, which are Islamic to some extent, and I feel like I don't have the baggage to talk about that area. There's also Togar, who in his solo show 2 years ago actually made a tribute for Danarto, well, from the empty canvases work. So there is Mas Hairu Salim, who is a publisher, and who I recently heard his talk, who's speaking about humor. And I think this is really funny that no one talks about the humor part of Danarto. Meanwhile, in like informal conversations, that's all we talk about, like the way he dressed, how he call other people. He has nicknames for people, and how he argued his work in an exhibition. I remember Enin actually saying that in a tribute to Khairil Anwar exhibition, Danarto submitted 2 paintings of like a women figure. And so Enin asked, so who are these people in relation to Khairil Anwar? And Mas Danarto's answer was like, well, she's the ex-girlfriend. I mean, how would you argue that? Yeah, so there are quite a number of people here that maybe it's interesting to hear what they think about Danarto. And also about what we have shared. No?
When did he first went for pilgrimage? Like when was his first Mecca trip?
83.
Mm-hmm. Because, well, while the others are formulating their comments or questions, I am just curious, actually.
Yeah. There you go.
Since when he is kind of labeled as sophistic artist, and why?
Oh, I think as early as Godlob. The why I also don't know how to answer. I mean, I guess a lot of his talks, he also positioned himself as like a part of God. And he spoke about not only that God exists in the things that are surrounding him and people that are surrounding him, but also in him. And he says that a lot in his talks. And I guess that is why he is taken towards that direction. Also, he mentioned quite a lot of times he cited tasawuf. So very early on.
Halo, halo.
Ya, Mas Hendro.
Ya, oke. Wah, presentasinya bagus sekali, Grace. Selamat, Grace. Saya senang sekali mendengarkan presentasi kamu. Dan sebelum itu saya menikmati juga amat sangat pembacaan cerita pendek. Apakah kita boleh sebut itu sebagai cerita pendek ya? Tapi memang saya kira buku itu dilabeli kumpulan cerita pendek Danarto gitu ya, oleh Ratna tadi. Saya ingin bertanya apakah kenapa justru abrakadabra yang dipilih dibacakan bukan misalnya Cak Ngung yang karya Danarto yang dimuat di dalam buku kumpulan tulisan Senova Baru yang disunting oleh Jim Supangkat itu. Saya kira kenapa saya bertanya demikian, karena saya pikir ada banyak sekali kemungkinan lain yang mungkin saja, terutama dalam hal pelafalan, lalu bagaimana kita harus membaca kode atau tanda-tanda pada, kita sebut saja cerita pendek ya, Cak Ngung itu yang bagaimana harus membunyikannya menjadi sebuah pembacaan. Itu yang pertama. Terus yang kedua, saya kira ada sesuatu yang setidaknya bagi saya baru yang disebut oleh Grace tadi ketika Danarto secara rutin selama 3 bulan menulis cerita bersambung di harian Republika. Kalau betul bahwa dia setiap kali memulai cerita dengan membuat kerangka atau sketsa gambar, saya penasaran sekali ini apakah masih mungkin kita menemukan arsip gambar-gambar atau kerangka cerita itu. Itu setidak-tidaknya ada berapa ratus lembar kalau begitu ya. 3 bulan, 9 bulan, ya 9 paling. Mungkin dia tidak hanya membuat satu kerangka untuk satu cerita, bisa saja beberapa. Nah itu saya kira penasaran sekali, kalau saya kira akan luar biasa kalau kita bisa menemukan arsip gambar-gambar Danarto sebagai kerangka cerita pendeknya atau cerita bersambungnya. yang sampai sekarang saya juga nggak bisa membayangkan bagaimana dari sebuah oret-oretan gitu ya, meskipun tadi Grace sudah membayangkan sebuah lukisan yang kemudian menjadi naskah teater, tapi sama sekali saya nggak bisa membayangkan bagaimana seperti sebuah gambar yang konon abstrak atau kita bisa bayangkan sebagai sesuatu yang nyaris nggak ada bentuknya gitu lalu muncul sebuah cerita. Nah, itu mengingatkan kita mungkin pada lagi-lagi kita kehilangan banyak yang berharga dari karya Mas Denarto. Ilustrasi cerita-cerita wayang dia di majalah Zaman selama beberapa tahun itu, konon sampai sekarang juga tidak ada yang menyimpan. Hanya Denarto yang waktu itu pernah suatu kali dia ingin memamerkan gambar-gambar itu, yang sangat mengharukan. Dia memfotokopi gambar-gambarnya sendiri dari majalah, membesarkan, lalu kemudian dia menggambar ulang, dan dia mengakui atau mengatakan bahwa ini gambar-gambar saya, tetapi ini gambar saya, ini bukan fotokopian, dia bilang gitu, karena di situ ada titik dan garis saya, jadi seakan-akan dia men-trace lagi semua gambar-gambar itu. Tapi ya sayang sekali tidak ada orang yang mau memperhatikan itu, dan karya itu akhirnya memang tidak dipamerkan. Tidak jadi dipamerkan, saya tidak tahu kemana gambar-gambar itu sekarang. Saya kira itu dulu komentar saya. Terima kasih.
Maaf Mas Hendro, itu tadi peristiwa yang fotokopi tahun berapa kira-kira?
Mungkin 2000 atau 2001. Saya tidak perlu menyebut galerinya ya, tapi waktu itu Denarto membawa gambar-gambarnya dan mungkin malah sudah di frame ya. Dia bawa dengan mobilnya, dia turunkan ke galeri, dia tunjukkan ini gambar-gambar saya loh. Tapi orang memang sudah tahu bahwa sebelumnya memang ada gambar-gambar wayang Denarto di majalah Zaman, dan memang dengan mudah bisa diketahui bahwa ini bukan langsung digambar di atas kertas, tapi ya khas Denarto di antara sungguh-sungguh dan nggak sungguh-sungguh gitu kan. Dia ngeyel bahwa ini gambar saya asli. Kenapa? Karena di situ masih ada garis saya, ada titik-titik saya, dan seterusnya.
Mas Hendro, boleh ya kalau balasnya pakai bahasa Inggris biar Rachel nggak nerjemahin terus. We actually haven't looked into Nasirun's collection. He is the one who took everything from the last house that Denarto was living in. We actually haven't gone there, and it would really be interesting to look at that. But if that's early 2000s, I guess there are his drawings that we have the documentation from Kedai Kebun, because actually he did a solo show in Kedai Kebun, which are illustrations in 2004. In 2004, and it's for 2 editions of Seno Gumira's book, and another exhibition was actually in belum di sini belum ya, di Bentang ya. Di Bentang.
Gambar-gambar yang dipamerkan itu masih yang dipamerkan di Kedai Kebun dengan style wayang ya?
Iya, betul. Kalau tadi ya tentang membunyikan cakngung ya, mungkin kita bisa dengar Togar ya yang pernah mencoba ya. Mungkin kita bisa dengar Togar, maksudnya how Togar looks at the works and how he reads it and actually perform it into another form is maybe interesting, and also maybe it's what we should do with all his works anyway.
Itu performance
maksudnya pernah dan pernah dibikin jadi instalasi juga kan.
Wah, saya nggak tahu itu ya.
Tahu dong, kamu nulis lagi di Tempo.
Bukan yang Cakngung dong.
Pak Bambu yang datang ya?
Iya, bukan Cakngung. Mungkin yang
maybe
lain.
we can hear from Togar or Ale. Have you read the book, Ale? Can we go with Togar first?
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I think it's very good that that we listen to the voice of Mbak Ratna from the novel of Danarto. And I think that's the way to go, I guess. My experience with Danarto is not as comprehensive as this, what we just experienced today. Yeah, I can see more now this self-reference and self-translate. I think a lot of translation in Danarto's work, and but it seems like he knows his audience, and it seems like he's willing to just, I think maybe if he lives today, he would be some like YouTuber or someone like influencer, because I think the writing as medium and having these channels to be, or like to publish his voice, I think it's yeah, but the reference itself, I was intrigued with your presentation, with the materials of your presentation when you mentioned about when he's doing the residency in Japan, when he couldn't speak same language there, and then he start to draw as kind of like, but that makes me realize that it's still the core of this is like voicing out, or to be heard. And in one of the Abracadabra, he also mentioned about the character of sound, which is rather quiet, which I think is also a reference to himself, I guess, as an artist or as a person, that he's rather quiet, and sound in the form of text is also quiet, that it only can be heard when you read it. And when Ratna Mufida read it, I think it's the way to go. It makes a lot of sense. That's from me.
Please, Mas Salim. Maybe we can go to
bukannya Saleh Hussein dulu ya? Tadi,
oh, boleh.
Bertanya ke Saleh Hussein.
Ya.
Hai. Halo semua. Terima kasih ya. Presentasinya ganteng tadi. Ganteng gue bilangnya. Menarik. Terima kasih juga buat malam ini nih. Asik nih. Gue udah baca buku ya, Orang Jawa Naik Haji sama Cahaya ya. Cahaya Rasul ya. Cerita yang ada di buku Orang Jawa Naik Haji itu sama aja kayak gue dulu diceritain sama keluarga gue, orang tua gue, ketika gue misalnya dulu lahir di sana gitu. Jadi gambaran-gambaran mengenai orang Jawa yang tinggal di Arab, terus bagaimana orang-orang Jawa itu datang, terus dengan segala macam kelucuannya gitu ya. Makanya mungkin lebih banyak cerita humor sebenarnya secara tidak langsung gitu yang dihadirkan secara polos gitu sama Mas Danarto ya. Menarik gitu karena ya lu mengingatkan akan sesuatu yang memang paling tidak tuh udah secara cerita tuh udah deket gitu. Kalau yang Cahaya Rasul sebenarnya kayak apa ya, refleksi dia atas apa yang dia baca gitu. Ini kayak mungkin seniman, entah gue nggak menyebutnya dia seorang seniman atau bukan gitu ya. Hanya orang yang mungkin berpikir gitu, terus abis itu nongkrong sama banyak kiai gitu ya. Jadi gue pikir dan kiai yang memang terus berpikir gitu mengenai hadis gitu mungkin misalnya, atau bagaimana kedekatannya dengan ingin menciptakan Muhammad dalam keadaan yang realistis gitu ya, atau dengan kekhusyuannya dia gitu misalnya. Menarik soalnya karena jadi gue nggak ngelihat itu sebagai gue malah tidak mau dari kemarin gue baca buku itu gue tidak googling sama sekali karya-karyanya Danarto kecuali tadi ya gue lihat gitu. Jadi gue nggak mau lihat sama sekali karena gue benar kayak tadi ya, kayak seakan-akan drama radio tadi gitu. Jadi biar gue bisa membayangkan lagi kira-kira apa sih sebenarnya yang dilihat gitu. Jangan-jangan apa yang dilihat dia mungkin kita semua juga pernah melihat gitu. Walaupun ya itu tadi ya balik lagi soal waktu dan jangan-jangan memang yang kita lihat kita nggak percaya gitu. Jadi ada hal-hal yang memang sangat konseptual gitu yang ditawarkan sama Danarto. Seakan-akan memang kayak contoh dia menyebutkan dalam Cahaya Rasul kalau nggak salah inget gue bahwa ada satu ayat yang punya arti 7 gitu, punya 7 arti gitu. Dari 7 arti itu mecah lagi jadi 7 lagi gitu dan seterusnya. Dan ya cukup kompleks, maksudnya kompleks tapi dalam artian yang memang kayak ngorek-korek wilayah keagamaan tapi masuk ke dalam terus membuat satu pola pola pikir baru lagi gitu. Jadi ada yang ditawarin lagi dari situ. Jadi kayak next levelnya juga gitu dari apa yang ditawarkan atau yang udah dibaca sama banyak orang. Gitu sih dari gue mungkin. Mungkin habis ini gue akan lebih banyak ngobrol lagi nih sama Grace nih soal ini. Thank you.
Silakan Mas Salim.
Halo, terima kasih. Pakai bahasa ya, sorry ya.
Ya.
Oke, aku mau bertanya beberapa dan mungkin memberi informasi beberapa. Pertama mungkin informasi dulu. Saya kebetulan dekat dengan Buldan ya, Buldan Luhuri yang menerbitkan melati di sayap sepasang melati di sayap Jibril.
Setangkai melati.
Setangkai melati di sayap Jibril. Dan menerbitkan buku Seno yang ada ilustrasinya.
Ya.
Nah, dari Danarto juga sebenarnya aku dikenalkan sate kelatak karena dia suka sekali sate kelatak. Nah, waktu itu Danarto tidur di rumahnya Buldan untuk menyelesaikan buku Setangkai Melati di sayap Jibril itu. Dan ketika ilustrasi Seno itu Buldan sangat eksplisit menyebut, tolong Mas bikinkan ilustrasi untuk buku Seno karena saya ingat ilustrasi Mas Danarto di majalah Zaman. Ya. Tapi tolong dicek lagi. Saya nggak tahu apakah kemudian yang di majalah Zaman itu yang dimasukkan ilustrasi atau Danarto bikin lagi yang baru. Nah, itu yang aku nggak lupa ya. Yang jelas, Danarto waktu itu tidur hampir 1 bulan sampai 2 bulan mungkin di rumah Buldan. Di situ aku sering ketemu Danarto sebenarnya. Ini hanya, jadi kupikir mungkin perlu juga ngobrol sama Mas Buldan itu Grace gitu ya. Itu satu. Yang kedua, Danarto itu juga banyak sekali bikin cover buku ya. Jadi aku nggak tahu, salah satu cover buku yang aku ingat sampai sekarang itu Ramayana dan Mahabharata yang diterbitkan oleh Pustaka Jaya kalau tidak salah. Ya. Itu covernya dibikin Danarto. Nah, mungkin saja itu aku pernah tanya itu bikin, alah Mas paling setengah jam aku bikin kayak gitu. Nah, mungkin itu yang disebut dia bikin coret-coretan begitu gitu. Nah, ilustrasi yang lain aku nggak tahu lagi gitu ya, apa yang gimana gitu cover buku yang lain. Nah, yang ketiga aku mau komentar soal orang Jawa naik haji. Menurut aku enggak, sebentar dulu. Kemudian yang ketiga, di tahun 85-an itu ada majalah Amanah namanya. Nah, di majalah Amanah, majalah ini majalah Islam ya, sangat terbuka sekali. Nah, di majalah Amanah itu, aku banyak sekali waktu itu, maksudku pertama kali kenal nama Danarto di situ, karena dia banyak sekali nulis esai. Paling enggak mungkin lebih dari 2-3 kali, termasuk dia cerita berkunjung ke Gusmus, bagaimana, pokoknya dia mendefinisikan dirinya orang awam, nah orang Jawa yang tidak kenal Islam. Nah, ini ada kaitannya dengan orang Jawa naik haji. Nah, orang Jawa naik haji ini saya kira kalimat yang sangat lucu dalam konteks waktu itu, karena ada asumsi bahwa orang Jawa sejati itu nggak akan naik haji. Ada asumsi begitu. Makanya kan nggak ada orang Lampung naik haji, orang Aceh naik haji, orang Banjar naik haji, orang Madura naik haji. Tapi ketika dipasangkan dengan Jawa, dia jadi sangat lucu, sangat menarik gitulah ya. Orang Jawa naik haji itu. Nah, karena ada asumsi bahwa orang Jawa yang sejati itu nggak naik haji. Kenapa? Karena Jawa itu bertentangan dengan Islam. Nah, ini yang saya kira yang sekarang makin kebelakangan, makin digugat ya, karena dianggap ini konstruksi kolonial. Oke lah, itu hal yang lain. Cuman saya ingin kasih contoh aja, ada teman saya baru-baru menerbitkan buku Nancy Florida yang menggugat menggugat konstruksi ini. Dia cerita bahwa bagaimana kolonialisme itu membangun oposisi binar antara Islam dan kejawaan. Sehingga dia bilang namanya membacanya apa ya, itu ahli filologi Belanda itu Piesut ya menganggap bahwa pada abad ke-18 terjadi renaissance kebudayaan Jawa. Ketika itu banyak sekali, kata dia, terbitan-terbitan yang bernuansa Hindu-Buddha. Nah, Nancy Florida bilang, alah omong kosong itu. Dari 1470 naskah zaman itu yang saya teliti, hanya 15 yang nuansanya Hindu-Buddha. Bagaimana bisa disebut renaissance kebudayaan Jawa dengan nuansa Hindu-Buddha? Nah, maksudku ini satu wacana baru yang ingin menggugat konstruksi ini gitu. Nah, konteksnya gitu ya. Jadi saya kira konteks orang Jawa naik haji seperti itu. Jadi orang Jawa naik haji itu nggak cocok. Dan betul-betul saya kira di buku itu Danarto menampilkan dirinya betul-betul orang Jawa yang betul-betul tidak kenal Islam. Jadi misalnya dia cerita sehingga menimbulkan kelucuan. Misalnya dia cerita di awal itu, kalau tidak salah ya, saya sudah mencari bukunya nggak ketemu. Saya nggak sama sekali nggak hafal bacaan naik haji. Kalaupun saya disuruh membaca, saya nggak mungkin bisa karena saya terlalu tua. Gitu, dia bilang. Nah, si kiai pembimbingnya bilang, ya udah kamu baca aja di dalam momen ritual apapun, Bismillah aja, Bismillah. Jadi di apapun dia baca Bismillah. Orang lain baca ini, dia baca Bismillah aja. Nah, kelucuan seperti itulah yang sebenarnya saya kira lahir dari buku seperti Orang Jawa Naik Haji. Jadi itu memang lucu di dalam konteks itu. Tapi lucu itu lahir dari satu asumsi tentang kebudayaan Jawa atau kejawaan dengan keislaman. Nah, ini terakhir ya, sorry agak panjang. Saya bertanya yang terakhir ini. Kenapa ya Danarto itu bisa bergabung di Seni Rupa Baru? Padahal dia ini kan angkatan 60-an ya. Kalau setahu kan Seni Rupa Baru 70-an. Nah, karena begini, aku pernah menulis biografi seorang seniman Sanggar Bumi Tarung namanya Misbah Tamrin. Nah, Misbah Tamrin itu temannya Amrus Natalsa lah. Nah, dalam salah satu ininya dia cerita bahwa di tahun 59-an atau 60, dia mengelola majalah Asri, diantaranya dengan Danarto. Nah, memang akhirnya aku nggak berhasil menemukan majalah yang mereka kelola itu ya. Tetapi hubungan Danarto dengan Misbah Tamrin ini sampai terakhir selalu saja ya seperti mantannya orang yang di kiri dan di kanan lah. Karena Misbah selalu bilang, ini loh SMS-nya Danarto, dia mengkritik aku. Sudahlah Misbah, nggak ada lagi komunisme itu, nggak ada lagi sosialisme itu, gitu. Jadi kayak gitu. Nah, jadi mungkin pertanyaannya kenapa ya bisa masuk ke 70-an dan apakah ada perbedaan antara ketika dia sebelum tahun 70, sebelum 65 dan setelah 65. Di dalam konteks diskusi tentang sastra sufisme di Indonesia yang pelopornya Danarto, semua orang bilang ini sebenarnya sastra yang betul-betul karena diciptakan oleh kondisi sosiologis pasca 65. Gitu. Nah, karena itulah kalau kita terakhir tadi ketika Grace membacakan semacam kredonya Danarto, dia bilang apa tadi ya?
Proses.
Ruang itu netral gitu ya. ruang itu netral, ruang itu kosong gitu. Itu betul-betul saya kira kredonya khas setelah 65 yang menyatakan bahwa nggak ada yang politis itu, semuanya objektif. Itu padahal sufisme itu kira-kira kalau ini yaitu buah karya pasca 65. By the way, saya kira terima kasih presentasinya, Grace. Aku banyak banget dapat informasi tentang
Terima
Danarto
kasih
ini.
sama-sama, Mas.
Ya, oke, makasih.
Thank you, Mas Salim. That's the question I can answer. The information, I'm very thankful. I think more homeworks for me and Rachel to find out all these materials. In terms of generation, I think he really wants to suit himself with the 70s. There are quite a lot of interviews in which he addressed himself as angkatan 70-an, as like the 70s generation. And I don't really know why. Actually, he has been active since early 60s. And he has been going back and forth to Jakarta for different theater works, because he did costumes, he did the stage and masks for Rendra's theater, and most of them are in Jakarta. So he's actually, since early on, I think he's already cosmopolitan in that sense. But and he always associate himself to the 70s. I guess that's why he's included in the Seni Rupa Baru exhibition. Yeah. Pak Bambu.
Ya.
Can we, while having Mas Bambu speaking, can we go to his timeline from the 60s, please?
Ya.
Halo?
Ya,
Pak
silakan Mas Bambu.
Sudah, suara saya sudah terdengar?
Sudah.
Terdengar jelas.
Oh, sorry. Pertama saya mengucapkan terima kasih sama Chris karena itu memberi dasar yang lebih kuat menurut saya bahwa Danarto itu sangat multidimensi. Bahkan saya bisa bilang dia pernah satu kontraan sama saya. Saya bisa bilang bahwa antara hidup dan karyanya itu kadang-kadang susah dipisahkan. Saya akan memberikan informasi acak aja. Yang pertama tadi dibilang Mas siapa itu yang Danarto tidak tahu bacaan Islam dan sebagainya, itu betul. Dan kiainya yang membimbing dia naik haji itu memberikan dia yang dia sebut sebagai doa sapu jagat. Apa itu saya tidak tahu. Nah, Danarto itu salat. Tetapi dia tidak membaca bacaan seperti orang salat biasanya. Dia membacanya dalam bahasa Jawa. Yang dibacanya itu ya menurut ingatan dia ketika membaca terjemahan Al-Quran. Dan di rumahnya itu yang dia simpan itu ada Al-Quran terjemahan bahasa Jawa. Itu satu. Yang kedua, Danarto keingintahuan segala hal itu luar biasa. Beberapa bukunya masih ada di saya dan salah satunya adalah buku yang mungkin agak jarang, tapi mungkin juga tidak, saya tidak tahu, tetapi judulnya adalah ibunya Yesus, siapa namanya? Maria.
Ya.
Bunda Maria di planet Mars. Judul bukunya itu aneh sekali. Nah, itu dibaca Danarto saya kira berkali-kali. Jadi imajinasi Danarto itu sangat aneh. Tetapi ini kajian Grace itu sangat menarik. Danarto itu hanya bisa dipahami kalau Anda menyajikan, nah ini Indro mungkin yang bisa. Ada sebuah pameran yang menyuguhkan segala karyanya. Dari lukisannya, dari ilustrasinya, dan sebagainya. Tadi disebut ilustrasi-ilustrasi. Yang lupa dibicarakan, dia juga memberikan ilustrasi 2 kumpulan puisi. Satu kumpulan puisinya Gunawan Muhammad, yang judulnya Interlude, dan satu kumpulan puisi Sapardi Djoko Damono, yang judulnya Akuarium.
Itu bikinan Danarto. Dan menarik sekali. Jadi ini saya kira kalau ada orang yang mengatakan bahwa seniman itu harus dipahami hanya dengan karya-karyanya, untuk Danarto saya kira hidupnya itu sendiri akan memberikan kita bekal untuk melihat karya-karyanya dengan lebih jauh. Karena ya misalnya salah satu contoh, ketika dia mempunyai, nah ini sangat personal ya, ketika dia mempunyai sepeda motor pertama kali, itu dia tidak tahu sepeda motor itu harus diapakan. Pada suatu hari macet di tengah jalan, dia kebawa ke bengkel. Saya bonceng karena itu saya tahu, dibawa ke bengkel, saya juga tidak tahu motor waktu itu. Saya dibawa ke bengkel, langsung tukang bengkelnya itu ketawa. Tahu nggak kenapa? Akinya itu tidak pernah diisi air, jadi dibiarin aja. Waktu itu belum ada asi yang tidak usah diisi, aki kering belum ada, tapi akinya itu harus, nah gitu. Dan kalau Anda membonceng Danarto waktu itu pasti ketakutan. Mengapa? Dia akan selalu pelan, tetap di pinggir kiri, dan kalau ada ini maaf dan ini membuka rahasia tapi mungkin ini penting. Dia tidak melihat jalan ke depan kalau ada perempuan cantik lewat, matanya ke perempuan itu, jadi saya kita dan ini mau nabrak orang. Nah gitu. Tuhan. Itu jadi pertemuan ini sangat berjasa sekali itu tadi bahwa Danarto itu memahami karya Danarto adalah memahami segala karyanya dan memahami hidupnya. Saya kira juga perlu disinggung bagaimana dia pernah masuk ke dalam komunitas Lia Aminuddin. Ya. Itu yang agama itu. Nah, saya kira cukup di situ. Kalau mau ngobrol lebih lama mungkin lebih asik kalau sambil minum kopi, tetapi harus tanpa COVID. Terima kasih.
Where is that? Oh yeah. Thank you, Pak Bambu. Yeah, that is actually a very interesting point that Pak Bambu said, that in 95, Danarto actually joined this, it's called Salamullah in the beginning, but more and more now it's known by the name of the leader, which is Lia Aminuddin, her full name. And actually, even after quitting Danarto still wrote some kind of like a pledoi when Lia Aminuddin was arrested in 2006. He wrote an argument about that, and yeah.
Perhaps we need to explain what kind of sect Lia Aminuddin had started and how it encountered a problem with our government and why, because probably the problem is slightly different from country to country.
Yeah, how do we explain that, Ale? How do we explain Lia Eden, Ale? I mean, I think I'm always fascinated because they wear great costumes. They have amazing poster designs. I don't really know how to talk about them, but as far as I read, or what I want to perceive as what they're doing, is they're trying to bridge between both Abrahamic religions, which is, well, dominantly Muslim here, but dominantly Islam here, and Christian. I think initially the fight have always been that. And woke. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know how to explain Lia Eden's. I mean, they weren't so much of a problem initially. They started becoming problem actually after Reformasi. Ironic.
Yeah. I remember I was clipping, like I was collecting photos of Lia Aminuddin.
Because she's amazing,
after.
no?
Yeah. And she also changed her costume.
She also has wings.
Yeah. So basically, she appeared after Reformasi with very visual mixed symbols of Christianity and Islam, and I think somehow that created a problem with the government, and she was sent to jail for that.
Several times.
Yeah.
She was sent to
Yeah.
jail several times, and conviction is always merusak nama baik Islam.
Oh, siapa?
Ya.
Lia Aminuddin.
Lia.
Dia kan dibela Gus Dur.
Ya.
Dia dibela Gus Dur. Dan ini satu yang baru saya ingat. Menurut Lia Aminuddin, Danarto itu adalah reinkarnasi Yesus Kristus.
No, Siddhartha Gautama.
Yes.
Siddhartha Gautama.
Siddhartha Gautama. Oh ya, Siddhartha Gautama.
Siddhartha Gautama.
Kalau Yesus Kristus ini siapa?
Anaknya Lia Aminuddin.
Oh. Iya, betul.
Danarto. Iya.
Mm-hmm. Well, if we don't have other comments or questions yet, I can start with another point of curiosity actually in Danarto's life. We pretty much learned that he went to art school, but how do you think he learned how to write?
Oh,
because the language he is writing in a language that is not even his first language.
Bahasa Indonesia.
Mm-hmm.
Actually,
dia banyak dulu ketika di Sanggar Bambu dia banyak menulis di majalah Si Kuncung cerita anak-anak sambil membuat ilustrasi.
Yeah, but that's not writing. In Kuncung he was doing the illustrations, and it was illustrations for like
bukannya ada 1-2 cerita pendeknya?
Nggak pernah terbit.
Cerita anak-anak.
Nggak pernah terbit.
Oh.
Nggak pernah terbit. It was never published. I checked Kuncung already. There are only like illustrations on the part where where the magazine is addressing like world issues.
Yeah.
So there would be like an introduction to who is Ophelia, or who is Frankenstein, things like that he would be illustrating. He did went to a literary vocational school when he was in high school for 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
Only for 2 days. But Sanggar Bambu, I think one of our participants here is someone who's doing research on Sanggar Bambu. I don't know if he's still around. Atif. Sanggar Bambu is not only a place for visual artists. It's a place where also Linus Suryadi, also Rendra, like quite a lot of like different people from different arts disciplines were in Sanggar Bambu, and they have publications too. So I guess it sort of comes from there.
Grace tahu nggak apakah Danarto itu kutu buku?
Nggak tahu.
Oh, bukunya banyak sekali soalnya. Bukunya banyak sekali. Saya juga tidak tahu, tetapi di buku-buku yang ada di rumah saya, beberapa buku itu ada coretan-coretan dia, jadi memang dia baca betul. Satu itu. Yang kedua, dia penonton bioskop yang tidak memilih-milih film. Betul, kalau itu jadi tahu. Betul. Itu film apa saja kalau sempat dia tonton dan nggak tahu ya itu bagaimana dia. Dan kalau dia ikut seni rupa baru, kalau tidak salah karena tahun 73 putih-putihnya itu sudah dipamerin.
Ya betul.
Ya kan? Dan salah satu sebabnya karena itu. Dan mengapa tahun 75 tidak ikut? Nah itu yang saya tidak tahu. Mungkin karena tahun 75 itu eksklusif ya.
No, because
Harsono, Jim.
And in the preparation towards 75, he was in a trip to Paris with Sardono.
Yeah. Oh ya.
He was in a.
Nah, itu juga pengalamannya dengan Sardono saya kira juga membentuk Danarto ya. Dia ke Jepang, ke Iran dan sebagainya.
Yes.
Satu itu. Dan ada satu cerita mungkin juga sudah diceritakan kepada Grace atau kepada orang lain. Dia itu selalu obsesi pengalaman masa kecilnya di Sragen. Dia orang Sragen kan, di zaman Belanda. Dia selalu kalau mau sekolah atau apa gitu ceritanya atau pergi kemana itu dia selalu melihat orang-orang disiksa Belanda itu loh, di jalan-jalan gitu. Itu yang melekat di mimpi-mimpi dia dan sebagainya. Dia cerita sama saya tentang itu. Barangkali Grace sudah tahu juga.
Iya, Mas Enin.
Ya, 75 itu nggak ikut seni rupa baru karena memang dia nekat menyusul Sardono ke Perancis ya. Kemudian ya itu pengalaman bekerja dengan Sardono di Perancis, karena kan sebenarnya Sardono memang resmi diundang tapi terlambat itu datangnya di kota apa itu, Nancy ya, semacam festival internasional untuk tari kontemporer gitu, sehingga
Mas
tidak
Enin.
dijadwal ya.
Mas Enin, ada Dylan, ada Merv, ada Daisy.
Oh.
Pakai bahasa Inggris aja dong. Kasihan sih itu, si Rachel.
So yeah, I think Sardono was invited to perform in this international like performance contemporary dance festival in out of Paris, yeah, at the time, but he was late. Like this is 70s, yeah, so late not by days, I think late by month, yeah. So basically, he was not in the schedule. But he tried to convince them because he already arrived in France, convince the organizer whether he can, let's just say, hang around the festival. And then he was assigned to help the crew in one of the open stage for various performance in that stage. A couple days later, one of the performers somehow maybe got sick, so the performance was canceled. And then Sardono actually proposed that whether he can replace or fill in that schedule. And then the organizer actually, because they know that they invited Sardono at the beginning as one of the performers, said, okay, but then you only have one slot and we don't have any more budget to do whatever stage kind of things that you want. And like a miracle, some kind of miracle, one day or the same day when Sardono actually Sardono actually stayed in the guest house of Indonesian embassy in Paris. He was back from the performance area late in the evening, and suddenly the officials there said that you have a guest, and the guest is actually from Indonesia. When Sardono opened the door, there was Danarto. So the next day, Sardono discussed this idea of filling in that empty slot for the evening performance with Danarto, and they come up with the idea. Basically, Sardono underneath I think they cut off or they turn down, they pull down the whole tent. And Sardono was in the middle of the stage and under the tent, and Danarto basically just move around and make sort of like the tent move like wave, something like that. And out of probably like crazy luck, this is the only performance reviewed by a famous contemporary dance reviewer and published in Le Figaro, one of the most important newspaper in Paris. And this story goes long, you know, how Sardono and Danarto actually spend their time in various unique, funny, ironic kind of experiences around Europe. The first time, I think, because after that, the reviewer, this famous reviewer, which I cannot remember his name, introduced Danarto and Sardono to Balthus, yeah, the famous painter who lives in Paris at that time. And then Balthus actually said he was preparing to do, like inviting a close friends to do his birthday party because his wife, a Japanese lady, Balthus' wife, a Japanese lady, would like to do a big celebration. And then they plan to do it something somewhere in Italy, in this old palace. So Sardono and Danarto actually invited to join the party as well. So that's how they then decided to go to Italy after Paris. And Sardono actually wrote part of some sort of like part of this his experience with Danarto in his sort of like autobiography, yeah. But other than that, many details which are completely hilariously funny. I heard directly from them, actually, from Danarto and Sardono. So because I met Danarto a lot of times, I tried before this event, actually before this talk, this presentation this afternoon, I tried to find one letter that he sent to me end of December 99, so close to 2000. It was attached with the cutout of newspaper about the doomsday because of Y2K. And then about 3 pages handwritten, explaining the concept of doomsday, in relation to Y2K and the premonitions by the Aztec people, Islamic belief, and so on and so forth. But I still cannot find that later letter. If I can find it, I will share. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the insight, Edwin. We have a question from Ika, translated by Chita.
Oh.
Yeah. Besides the pilgrimage year, what are the important years for Danarto in terms of his personal life, also his artistic practice? Also, how is Danarto's relation to his childhood hometown, Sragen?
I think an interesting year would be 67, because that was the year he wrote Rintrik, that won a best short story of the year in Horizon. And when he started writing Rintrik, he actually changed his religion. He converted from Catholic to Islam, with a very simple but a very prominent argument, which is to be closer to the dominant society. Menjadi lebih dekat ke masyarakat. So yeah, I think that is an interesting year, 67. And Atif ya udah nggak ada ya. Sebenarnya gue juga penasaran. I'm also curious about the Sanggar Bambu part, like his role in Sanggar Bambu. Because he split, and Sanggar Bambu also as an organization split into the Sanggar Bambu 59 and then the Sanggar Bambu Sanggar Bambu 59, the ones who remains in Jogja, and the ones who moved to Jakarta because basically money is in Jakarta, called themselves Sanggar Bambu. But I don't have much materials on that yet.
Mungkin Chris harus wawancara, mumpung orangnya masih ada, yang namanya Hardiono.
Betul, Pak.
Sudah
Jadi
ketemu?
ada namanya Mas Atif, tadi dia ada di awal presentasinya, dia sedang penelitian tentang Sanggar Bambu.
Oh. Udah ketemu Hardiono?
Belum, sayanya belum.
Hardiono itu orang Muhammadiyah, sangat dekat dengan Danarto. Saya kira dia salah seorang yang membuat Danarto naik haji. Satu itu. Dan kedua, di masa-masa akhir, termasuk lukisan Gus Dur dibisikin malaikat Jibril, itu sebetulnya karya dua orang ini. Jadi Danarto tahun-tahun itu sudah bilangnya kepada saya, saya sudah tidak kuat konsentrasi. Jadi lukisan-lukisan tahun-tahun itu dia hanya menggambar kontur aja, garis pinggir, lalu ada bidang-bidang yang dia kasih warna, ini merah, biru, semua yang menyelesaikan Hardiono. Termasuk lukisan Allah itu yang nulis Hardiono.
Oh, makanya rapi ya?
Ya, betul. Hardiono itu ilustrator, pelukis yang rapi sekali. Sekarang dia sudah di kursi roda. Jadi kalau Grace mau cepat-cepat dapat bahan dia, harusnya cepat ketemu dia. Rumahnya di Condet.
Ya.
Saya bisa nganter Anda kalau perlu.
Iya Pak, makasih Pak. Mau
Pakai
Pak.
COVID juga nggak?
Pakai COVID.
Nah, itu masalahnya. Ini COVID ini kayak
I
krisis
actually,
mengancam dunia.
yeah, I actually have like a sum up question, and probably more than one person in this forum would have opinion about that. To me, it seems that Danarto's creative process is very, it's very corporeal. That that the transfer between idea into an actual work seldom takes place in a very, very short time. So one can also say it's quite spontaneous. But this kind of process in order to gain the trust and the necessary artistic reputation, from, let's call them the gatekeepers. I'm aware that we don't have the same infrastructure in terms of criticism, curatorial, in back then in the 60s and 70s as we have now. But still, this kind of spontaneity and corporeality, I think, requires a kind of trust and intimacy between him and the critics or whoever it was that were the gatekeepers of his time. And I mean, I don't deny that he has amazing ideas, incredible and quite unique, but how do you think he earned all this trust and intimate relationship with the gatekeepers of the time? Like, is it only just by talking his way through, or there were actually more connecting points between him and the gatekeepers of his time?
Like, who would be the gatekeepers of the time?
No
because
idea.
I think when he started like working with Rendra, for example, it was way before Rendra called his theater as Bengkel. It was still kelompok studi theater in Jogja. So he wasn't also big. He wasn't already big by the time. That was even before he went to America, before Rendra went to America. And that is a decade before he just suddenly, before Enin's story, that he suddenly showed up in Paris following Sardono. I guess at those years, if you just arrive in like a completely foreign country, your friend will just like sort of facilitate you. And the kind of relationship that came out of that trip is actually what published Godlop in the first place, because it was published by Dongeng dari Dira, which was the title of the theater trip to Europe. It was first published by them, which clearly is not a publisher, not a literary publisher figure. And then he was really active in Horizon, which is sort of central after 65, right? He was really active there. And he was also working as the poster communication officer for Jakarta Arts Council. So he was designing posters for all of the things that happened there. Yeah, I mean, Tim is the place that he would meet everyone, I guess.
Yeah, because of course one of the criticism about accessibility to Indonesian art world or literary world is that instruction or education to become creative writers or artists often connects very closely to, you know, peers. Yeah. Like you need to get through certain peers to be able to be accepted. And it is very interesting how Taman Ismail Marzuki plays a role in this, especially in end of 60s, early 70s, because it's not just the peer where, you know, the gatekeepers are, but for a lot of young artists at that time, it was also a place where they were exposed to more cosmopolitan or regional experience, right? And so I'm thinking that Danarto must be one of the artists that clearly benefited from this, yeah, being being or having access actually to these peers. And I'm really wondering how, you know, he arrives into this peer. I think a lot of understanding, our understanding about Indonesian art scene or culture scene would depend on, you know, the description of how this peer actually worked at the time. Like, for example, Mas Bambu, how do you decide which exhibitions to write on, for example? Mas Bambu waktu itu memilih pameran yang harus ditulis gitu, misalnya dikritik, itu gimana caranya gitu misalnya. Menarik sekali buat kita untuk memahami itu ya, relasi antara seniman, antara seniman dan wartawan pada saat itu.
Mesti dijawab nih.
Kalau mau.
Kriterianya mungkin Hendro yang sudah mengumpulkan banyak tulisan saya itu lebih tahu daripada saya. Bagaimana saya memutuskan ini ditulis atau tidak. Tapi yang penting begini, Anda benar bahwa Taman Ismail Marzuki pertama kali, terutama di tahun 60-an, dia berdiri kan tahun 68, dan sampai awal-awal 70-an, itu memang pilihan. Karya-karyanya tidak sembarangan. Jadi asal itu dipamerkan di Taman Ismail Marzuki, saya menulis, biasanya media, dan media waktu itu sangat akrab dengan kesenian, ya, sangat akrab dengan Taman Ismail Marzuki, itu pasti dimuat. Jadi kalau pameran itu ada di Taman Marzuki, udahlah, pasti itu layak dibicarakan. Kira-kira begitu aja waktu itu.
I think we sort of addressed it a bit when we were speaking about Gotot also, right?
Yes.
The change in the Taman Ismail Marzuki really right after Ali Sadikin took off, and they sort of structurally censor the institution by making government workers to work for the center.
Ya, itu besar sekali perubahan.
And there are several questions in the chat group. Mas Salim saying it may be maybe this is simple but interesting. When did Danarto start using Ahmad in front of his name? In Ramayana and Mahabharata, his name is as a cover, as the cover maker was written as Ahmad Danarto, but we only know him recently as just Danarto. Actually, I don't know that. I don't know about this Ahmad Danarto name.
Mungkin ini perlu dicek, Grace. Itu dari Lia.
Oh, jadi
that explains.
Okay.
Tapi mesti dicek.
Yeah.
And on the cover of that book, Orang Jawa Naik Haji, he was using, or at least the name was written as Haji Danarto.
Of course, that's the pilgrimage.
Dan kalau tidak salah, judulnya Orang Jawa Naik Haji itu bukan dari Danarto.
Oh ya.
Ya, itu dari Graffiti Pers. Siapa yang bikin? Saya nggak tahu. Ya salah seorang orang di Tempo lah.
There's something around the lines that Mas Salim was explaining. Actually, before it was compiled as a book, there were like 6 different articles in Amanah, which is a series that is then edited to be the Orang Jawa Naik Haji. So there were previously published texts. They are not 100% the same, but it's a similar story that was earlier published.
Would you like to say something about Sragen, Grace, or do you know anything before I read other comments or questions?
There is nothing in particular about Sragen, I think, but there's a huge fascination on did we write it in the timeline, Rachel? The research he did on like mosques in Java. There was a huge fascination on how Islam become a part of the culture. So he did a research in the 60s. Yeah, Rachel, gue lupa. 60s, right?
Yes, it should be on the timeline.
Top.
Ya, di atas.
Kok nggak nemu sih? Can't find it, but there was a huge fascination on
soundtrack.
Ada soundtrack. There was a huge fascination on Islam in a Javanese context. So he visited different mosques, and he tried to pitch it to different sponsors or publishers for it to be a book. He wanted to look at 40 mosques all over Java. And in that journey, he wrote different short stories. So if we look at not the only view compilations mentioned, like included his signature at the end of the short story, but in every short story in Horizon has like place. So it would say Ambarawa, it would say Cirebon when he was writing that.
Actually, the traveling to mosques on the di bawah.
Oh,
it's between 67 and 68.
Yeah.
So for a year, he traveled.
Yeah, but it's also like Lisa mentioned, it's also something corporeal, because for him the travel is, other than to look at the elements in the architecture of the mosques, it's also to really experience praying in that mosque. So a number in like quite a number of interviews, he would mention like the different ways of Islam incorporating to local culture. And yeah.
Another question is about whether or not Danarto has a specific political orientation or views.
I don't think he had ever openly addressed that, but to read it, actually it's you can really see it in all the short stories that would express the situations of oppressed people because of authoritarian government. And most of his short stories that are within a family setting, it would be describing the so-called rich militaristic family that are abusing their power through business, which is something I addressed a bit through the Dinding Ayah, Dinding Anak, Dinding Ibu, through the three short stories that I ended my presentation with. There is a question sent privately. Sent privately by David. Huge thanks to all of you. Sorry, I know the conversation has moved on, but can we return to Lisa's earlier question? How did he learn to write or train as a writer? The transmedia dimension of your presentation may open an interesting window onto political context. And that political context is not only national. We're talking about depoliticization that was absolutely regional. Implicitly in Lisa's question was an assumption you don't become literate in art school.
Thank you for spelling that out, David.
Yeah. Where did he learn to write? I don't really know, actually. I would assume that it's because of hanging out in Sanggar Bambu, and that there are writers there. Because also in his early short stories, he would be writing for people in Sanggar Bambu. There would be like title and then written for the mother of Sunarto PR, who's basically which is basically their house is the headquarter for Sanggar Bambu. So the mother is someone who's taking care of all the Sanggar Bambu and their guests. And Linu Suryadi definitely was also there. Yeah, I don't really know. Like, where did he train? I think it's the society surrounding him. And there was actually Rintrik was actually his first published short story, and it got an award in the literary magazine.
I would say that from I don't read the Naruto stories extensively, so I might have the wrong impression about his style of writing. But I do think that he has a lot of very descriptive and element in his writings, and very conversational mode also of creating dialogues, not only between characters but also between characters and their inner self, or characters and the narrator, which for me reminds me a little bit of how puppet masters work, because they go in and out of the frame all the time, and characters would talk to them, or interrupt this whole dispositive of storytelling. So I was wondering if this influence of wayang narratives plays a role in his growth as a writer. And because for a lot of Indonesian writers that comes from Java, mostly male writers, they're very influenced by this mode of storytelling.
Yes, for sure. I guess the many references on like figures that are big in theater is due to working with Rendra in early stages. But what you will find all over his short stories, and even the basic premise of his only novel, Asmara Loka, is a wayang story. And interestingly, the figures that he would pick from this wayang and recreate basically are mostly women. There are quite a lot of analysis on that, actually. Reading the Naruto through feminism lens, stuff like that.
Okay, the chat column is getting quite lively here. I'll read out starting from Pak Hairus, who says, maybe your dogs want to ask questions.
They want food.
Wait, okay. So next one is coming from Dylan. He says, just a quick comment. I very much agree with Pak Hairus Salim's comment about the Naruto's point that the place of creation is neutral / kosong as a fruit of Pasca 65. So after post 65 Indonesia. Ibu Sylvia Tiwon has written about the kind of turn to existentialism in this period as well. But I also wanted to say that this Sufism or Javanism can be seen from the story today. That there are many points in there that are very much from a Platonic or Neoplatonic tradition, like the sculptures of light, in brackets. the sculptures of sound as pure universals, and even the use of Hamlet itself as being able to pass over this line of death. What I think is interesting about this story is that while it draws upon existentialism, in brackets, Sartre's famous work is called The Wall. Danarto's Wall is very different than Sartre. There isn't the kind of nausea here. Thanks for the great presentation, Grace. Yay!
Thank
Do you want to comment to that?
There are more to in terms of light. I don't really know yet how to go there, but there is a very interesting trajectory with this patung suara, actually, with this sound sculpture, and in the convoluted relationship between Danarto and Seni Rupa Baru. Also in the 79 exhibition of Seni Rupa Baru, there is a sculpture by Bonyong Muniardi, which is literally called patung suara, or sound sculpture. But it's the point in which it's neutral from 65. I think it holds a lot of truth in the cases of Seni Rupa Baru and also in Danarto, because he does avoid to talk about that. And in a lot of Sanggar Bambu's standpoint is that they are the apolitical organization of the time, which is in one way or another, it was almost impossible to be apolitical in 59. So they were a bit mocked because of that, but they were also sort of a safe zone for these people who doesn't want to immediately be part of any existing parties at the time. And which is to make another point, which is also Horizon's situation. They were the ones promoting humanisme internasional, humanisme universal, universal. There even is quite a lot of there is a lot of texts that were sort of arguing or rebuilding the position of the Manifesto Kebudayaan published through Horizon until the 80s. So he is in that sort of that circle.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to sort of reposition. Yeah, they claim that their position was neutral, that they were against going into political camps of the time, but I think it's interesting to form an opinion also how we look at the world back then, because these alignments are more or less influenced by the Cold War and the cultural politics of Cold War. So I think we definitely could reformulate some positions there. I continue to read Hendro Wianto's comment, because this is also very interesting. I'll just directly translate it. Have you, Lisa, Grace, Rachel, seen any of Danarto's theater work or the reenactments? I would like to know your experience or how you felt about seeing Danarto's theater works after reading his literary works and visual arts through archive and photos. I mean, I myself cannot really say anything about this because I hardly know Danarto's early works, which is actually a loss. Maybe Grace and Rachel can say something about his stage works.
I think maybe Rachel can say something about Bel Geduel Beh and Teater Tanpa Penonton. We had a lot of discussion surrounding Teater Tanpa Penonton. Theater without audience, sorry.
Rachel, would you like to say something about Teater Tanpa Penonton?
I don't remember a lot actually, but so the simple answer is no, I haven't actually seen any of the theater works before, because I've just known about Danarto back in November, so like around 8 months ago. I think me and Mbak Grace, we talked about Belga Duel and or teater tanpa penonton because we were talking about Abracadabra. Just the sense that the writer comes into the play and introduces himself, and then in teater tanpa penonton, in theater without an audience, from what I've read, one of the characters is also like a narrator, so he functions as someone who orchestrates what's going on, tells the general narrative story. Yeah, just basically the audience become part of the play, and how in Abracadabra the readers are also referred to directly as if we could answer. So I think just like from the reading we did earlier, the recording from Baratna, when in the text it says setuju, do you agree? I kind of wish everyone here would answer to the question.
Yeah, I think Bu Melanie Budianta did write correctly. It's a play for all senses, and I would agree to that. It's a play for all senses.
Mas Hendro, which year was this review from Melanie Budianta? Do you remember? Sorry, Togar.
Ya.
Bu Melanie Melanie Budianta maksud saya, karena ada Melanie yang lain di sini lupa. Melanie Budianta menulis di
betul.
Kalau tidak salah obituari, apakah di majalah Tempo atau di koran Tempo ya. Nah, ketika membaca istilah itu bahwa Danarto sungguh adalah seniman menurut Bu Melanie yang benar-benar bermain dengan seluruh panca inderanya gitu. Saya lalu teringat bahwa sebenarnya sangat menyesal saya tidak pernah menyaksikan teater karyanya. Dan bahkan belum lama kalau tidak salah ketika ada festival teater, ada satu kelompok teater yang
teater alam
mementaskan cerita pendek Danarto ya. Mereka toh tidak mungkin menjaring malaikat. Itu ketika saya melihat foto di koran, jadi reportase dari pementasan itu, bagi saya luar biasa juga reenactment itu, memainkan kembali cerita pendek Danarto yang imajinasinya hanya bisa bayangkan melalui teksnya gitu. Lalu hanya dengan melihat foto itu saya merasa bahwa ini luar biasa ya, dan mungkin memang apa yang dikatakan oleh Bu Melanie itu rupanya jangan-jangan terutama harus dilihat melalui teaternya. Pak Sapardri almarhum misalnya pernah menulis, saya lupa apakah pada waktu itu dia menulis obituari atau pementasan ulang karya Danarto yang obituari ya, yang menyebut teater Danarto adalah sebuah genre yang terutama dipengaruhi oleh Banyolan Mataram itu siapa? Basio S begitu kan? Basio S. Nah, saya kira itu. Cuman ya saya kira itu hanya humor, tentu saja hanya salah satu segi dalam karya Danarto seperti yang dibicarakan di depan. Bahwa kemudian sekarang kita begitu tertarik menyusuri berbagai genre karya Danarto, saya kira karena dia barangkali hampir tidak mungkin ya dimasukkan ke dalam satu kategori atau isme atau kecenderungan, karena dia menjelajahi, menulis seni rupa, membayangkan seperti barangkali dia seperti membuat karya seni rupa, menulis karya sastra maksud saya, atau ketika dia menulis atau membuat karya seni rupa pasti mungkin kilasan-kilasannya adalah peristiwa, kata-kata, teks dan sebagainya. Dan tadi pertanyaan Mas Haryus mengenai kenapa Danarto bisa masuk ke dalam gerakan seni rupa baru, saya kira justru karena mungkin seingat saya ada yang mengatakan bahwa menjelang bubar itu kan Surabaya Baru semakin tidak jelas dalam hal keanggotaan. Siapapun boleh masuk dan boleh keluar, dan tidak jelas lagi kriteria yang digunakan untuk merekrut seorang seniman masuk ke dalam gerakan. Nah, kenapa bahwa Danarto sudah memamerkan karyanya Kanvas Kosong tahun 73, tapi absen pada pameran 75, tadi juga sudah dijawab oleh Mas Bambu dan Enin. Dan kenapa dia tidak muncul pada pameran 77, dan tiba-tiba karya Cak Mung itu masuk di dalam buku kumpulan tulisan gerakan, itu juga saya kira belum dijelaskan oleh penyuntingnya, oleh Pak Jim. Saya pernah bertanya kepada Pak Jim, jadi karya itu akan dianggap sebagai apa? Karya sastra, atau karya seni rupa, atau karya seni rupa baru? Karena jelas-jelas di situ disebutkan cerita pendek karya Danarto. Lalu Pak Jim jawabannya juga seperti itu. Danarto kan untuk 73 sudah membuat karya semacam itu, karya-karya konkret gitu ya, sehingga dia jadi tidak ada penjelasan atau argumen mengenai karyanya sebetulnya. Jadi lebih lebih kepada apa tadi? Lebih kepada kecenderungan untuk yang mungkin saya kira Danarto juga, saya tidak tahu apa sebetulnya komentar Danarto kalau dia melihat karya itu dianggap sebagai bagian dari GSRB atau GSRBI. Karena dia juga sering mengatakan, misalnya dia pernah bilang bahwa dia mungkin adalah seniman Indonesia pertama yang membuat karya instalasi. Tahun 60-an dia bilang, antara tahun 65 atau 66. Tapi ketika saya tanya di mana Mas pamerannya, karya itu di mana? Misalnya karyanya sudah nggak ada. Seingat saya dia pernah mengatakan karya itu dipamerkan di Jakarta. Dia pernah menyebut satu tempat, apakah museum yang sekarang menjadi museum keramik atau museum sejarah gitu ya. Tapi dia beberapa kali mengatakan itu menunjukkan kecemburuan Danarto pada waktu itu. Hampir semua karya instalasi lalu diklaim sebagai karya seni baru, dan hampir semua seniman membuat karya-karya instalasi ya. Danarto selalu mengatakan itu bahwa dia adalah orang seniman Indonesia pertama yang sebenarnya. Sayang sekali, tapi kata dia tidak ada yang menyaksikan dan tidak ada yang menyebut dia sebagai seniman instalasi pertama. Saya saya waktu itu bertanya, apakah ada yang nulis? Seingat saya mungkin dia pernah mengatakan, ya, tapi dia lupa. Kemungkinan itu di Sinar Harapan. Ada Sinar Harapan ya waktu itu ya, sebelum menjadi Suara Pembaruan. Nah, siapa tahu kita bisa menemukan itu, dan bahkan dengan fotonya.
Just a little note before Togar. Actually, I think the Cak Ngung is included in the book because Pak Priyanto Sunarto was also working on the book as designer and illustrator. And in his final project, maybe Chabib can say more. In his final project, he was visualizing 3 different poetries, and one of it is Danarto's. I haven't got a hold of the script yet, but I guess that would make sense because really before Cak Ngung in the entry of the book was Pak Priyanto Sunarto's text, that is seni rupa, seni bunyi, seni konkret ya. Yeah. Togar.
Yeah, Mau, I want to pose this thinking of like being inside and outside, like using this perspective, especially during this abracadabra text. And I mean, I don't know, he kind of like opposed this concept of like left, right, or north, south, and somehow maybe it's a mechanism of the time that not necessarily like translated to like a political post, but rather just as as a person and that at that time that still somehow need to express his or her kind of like opinion. And yeah, how do you explain this perspective, being inside and outside, kind of like things like asking the reader, but also be the one who narrate the story, be the one who, yeah, and kosong adalah isi, isi adalah kosong, and this mana suka kind of like perspective. Yeah, is there any way to explain this?
There was also a small conversation in the comment in the chat box, which Mas Hendro was saying kosong, or this is also the other problem with Danarto's works. I guess it's not as easy to translate. Habis tak sudah, I sort of like find whatever yet over yet undone, but I guess it actually needed a question mark if that's the correct translation. We scribbled quite a lot of translation for that. So kosong or empty or blank or negative, but not in the sense negative in the sense of space rather than as an opposition to positive. May be apa diartikan? It may mean not anywhere, but anywhere. And that is why now we are interested in his works that are non-categorical. And then Mas Salim was also mentioning that the keyword is not just kosong or empty or blank, but also neutral. And I really think this is why he is fascinating for us now to dig around, because amongst these not so easy to translate words, they are actually equal. Empty, blank, then neutral, wall, field are equal in that sense. In yes, I think it is to not fall into the typical binary position. In the 60s, it was clear, either you are somewhat related to the, in the 50s, towards 65, it was clear, either you are somehow related to the Communist Party, or you have to openly state that you are not leaning towards them. And afterwards, it's also as clear, either you are for the New Order or not. And if not, you have to find different ways to navigate. But I don't think he is in for it or against it. He wants this other space that is not, I don't know if it makes sense, but that's what I think of. Geisha is offering, maybe we should say Danarto-esque.
Yeah, but then is this inside outside from the Abracadabra text?
Yeah, teater tanpa penonton is maybe an interesting way to think about it. It is to blur between the. It is actually, it's not to give power, because if you give power to the audience, it is in a way hierarchical. It is really to blur the positions. And that he is basically in the several texts, he uses this teater tanpa penonton, theater without audience, when he is reviewing other theater works, actually. And he wants to look, he doesn't seem to want to accept the fact that the audience are someone that comes to a performance to just passively watch. He doesn't want to accept that. He wants to say that even if it's just their facial expressions, it will influence the actors. And therefore, why not since the beginning you allow the stage to be for everyone, something like that.
It kind of like resonate with the also part of the Abracadabra when he said, when you look into Patung Suara, the Patung Suara is more bright, more shiny, and then the Patung Cahaya is more shiny, and meanwhile the Patung Suara is like looking through a mosquito net, like it is, because when you mentioned it, it is really too blurred. I think I can relate that again back to the sound perspective or to the voice perspective.
Chabib is adding. Maybe I can add a bit about Pak Priyanto, because I think concrete poetry is part of Pak Priyanto's experimentation in graphic design in an Indonesian context, because he graduated and he wanted to sort of develop illustration as his final project, which at the time is really coming from seni grafis. Yeah, there were three poetries that were illustrated is Ilustrasi Buku Puisi O, Danarto, and the other one Chabib forgot. Yeah, Chabib, let's get that final project text, please. Yeah, actually, we are 2.5 hours now. Does anyone still want to say something? If not, maybe we continue on the next OBX edition. Do you have something more? No? All right, then if there's nothing more, maybe thank you so much for being here tonight and for actually spending so much time with us and also letting us know more things. We will surely continue this journey in unraveling Danarto, and we will poke you even more and ask questions. See you in the next OBX edition.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.
Thank you.
Terima kasih
you,
semuanya. Lisa, Grace,
Ya,
Rachel,
diskusinya,
Lisa.
Grace. Ya,
Mas Salim, nanti tanya-tanya lagi ya.
siap.
Gesha, thank you.